So you should have by now a course handout which has been passed around. It's one page double-sided, and you've also got some reading, which is in preparation for your first tutorial on Wednesday. Does anyone not have that? Put up your hand if you don't have it. Come and see me afterwards and get one more photo. Unless someone has a stack of them lying on their desk. Are there some up the back? Perhaps while Richard's getting the sound working, we'll just introduce the tutors. So my name's Anna Rose. I'm co-convening the course with Richard Baker, but we've also got the two tutors here today. So we've got Brian over there. Come up and say a bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi guys, I'm Wiley, tutoring this course this year. Nick and I did the course in its first year a couple of years ago, and yeah, so looking forward to getting into it with you guys this year.
And what tutes are you taking?
I'm taking the 1 to 3 tute, so the best tute.
Hey everyone, my name is Nick Wadler, no relation to Jeff Wadler, who you're hear from next week. I'm currently a disciplinary studies student, and as Brian said, we did the course 2 years ago now, which seems like a long time ago. I'm taking the Wednesday 11 o'clock and 3 o'clock tutes, and looking forward to the evening of that.
Awesome.
Okay, we'll give up with the digital lecture recording, so that's always a hazard.
I'm going to record it on my iPhone.
Could you turn the video on?
I've already turned it on.
Thank you. Okay. So welcome to Leadership and Influence. As Anna said, we're co-convening it. My name's Richard Baker. I should just tell you a little bit about the history of this course and the other Vice Chancellor's courses, so you can see how this course developed. So about 4 years ago, the Vice Chancellor and the Deputy Vice Chancellor decided we needed a course on dealing with complex issues, and that was the very first Vice Chancellor's course. There's now 4 such courses, and if you're interested in doing a minor in Vice Chancellor's courses, come and see me. The 4th course, starting this year, is called Mobilising Research, which Lawrence Cram, the former Deputy Vice Chancellor, is running. When I was running the leadership course in the first and second year, I was struck by the extraordinary leadership capacities and abilities and things that students already in this university were doing, and people were coming back 1, 2 or 3 weeks late for some amazing reasons. So there was one woman who'd helped set up a women's refuge in Port Moresby. Someone else had been involved in dealing with Ebola outbreaks in Uganda. There was a range of leadership characteristics being shown in the student body already, and I thought wouldn't it be great to get a course together early on in people's university degrees, so that's why you can do this course if you're a second year student, where people can meet people who are interested in leadership and influence in other parts of the university, and then hopefully go on to make a difference in terms of the rest of the time of the university. So that's the origin of this course. I'd like to today just do a couple of things before handing over to Anna, who will introduce our first speaker. We've already had the introductions of the tutors, so we're a bit ahead of time. I wanted to say something about the assessment, so it might be quite different for some of you, but I think in a course on leadership and influence, there's a requirement to think creatively about different ways of assessing that, and I also want to link that to the learning outcomes that are listed on your webpage. In terms of running the course, contact me in the first place. Phone's probably not such a good idea because I'm not often in my office, but if you email me, I'll promise to get back to you in 24 hours. Anna is going to have contact hours in my old office, which is literally underneath us. So downstairs in room 29 Forest Street, we'll have a contact period there between 2 and 4. But we'll try to mainly work through email, and you obviously also will have your tutors. So there's currently 4 tutorials in the course. If you haven't been to the Waddle page, can you please go there ASAP and enrol in one of the 4 tutorials, which I think there's still space in all those. So by the end of the course, there's some specific learning outcomes that we want you to be focusing on as the course goes on. One is this issue of different disciplinary strengths. So we'd really like you to get outside your comfort zone in this course in terms of the disciplines you know best. And that's a characteristic of all the Vice Chancellor's courses, that we're trying to get an interdisciplinary perspective on issues. And I think you'll be surprised just how differently different people will see leadership and influence. And remember that second word in the title, influence. So they're quite deliberately trying to broaden perspectives on leadership to include perhaps not so prominent roles in terms of being the person maybe out in the front of an organisation, but you can make huge differences in lots of different ways, and that's something we'll be exploring. Something else, and I should have started by acknowledging the traditional people whose country we're on today, is that throughout the course we'll be looking at different cultural perspectives on leadership, and you'll be quite struck again that different people from different places are going to see leadership and influence in very different ways. So again, that'll be something we'll be exploring throughout the course. There's a focus on working in teams in this course. There's a team assignment which will culminate in you in this room giving a brief in 14 weeks' time to the Vice-Chancellor. We did this last year and it was amazingly successful in terms of a dozen different groups all coming up with some really interesting ideas on how to enhance the ANU student experience. If you're working in leadership roles, you always are going to be working with others, and we'll hear a lot about leaders, followers, team builders, so we're quite unashamedly making you do some group work. Having said that, if you look at the web page, there are lots of things in place to try to make that group work, and for you to be reflecting all the way through about what are the things that make effective group processes work, and conversely, what are the kind of things we need to avoid. The word facilitate is there quite deliberately too, and another piece of assessment in the course is facilitating a tutorial, so facilitating learning others, I think is a key part of leadership skills. And we're quite keen for you to develop skills in speaking, so there is a speaking piece of assessment, and there's also a written piece of assessment. One thing that you'll hear from a lot of speakers is the importance of having a clear set of values about leadership and understanding different models. So a lot of people talk about things such as having a moral compass, so you don't actually have to think about how you'd act in a particular situation. You have some guiding principles underneath you that determine in many ways how you're going to respond in different situations. And we're also trying to get you to be very reflective, to think about yourself, to think about how you come across to others, to be able to sit outside yourself and observe yourself, so a focus on reflection in the assessment piece. And finally, just trying to build up a repertoire of very different leadership skills, thinking about different contexts and putting that into place. So in terms of the assessment, I won't go through this in detail, but I'd like you all to read this carefully before the first tutorial next week, and come to the first tutorial with feedback on what you think of that assessment, in particular the marking criteria and the background information. So if anything's not clear to you, it's probably not clear to somebody else, so do come to the tutorial and raise that, and any suggestions, particularly in terms of making the assessment criteria clearer, will be most welcome. As I said, the group project will be presenting to the Vice-Chancellor. The oral presentations will be in the second last week, and we have some systems in place to give you practice sessions throughout the course and giving short talks within your tutorial groups. And the learning portfolio in many ways is the capstone of the course, giving you a chance to reflect on everything that you do in the course. So be always open to learn from others during the course and lots of situations. So the final portfolios are due after, for example, the individual talks and also after the group presentation. So that's designed to give you the chance to reflect on what you learned on those. So in terms of what we expect you from the course, really keen for you to come ready with an open mind and ready to interact with everybody else in this room. So you're really here to learn from each other, so peer learning is going to be stressed throughout the course. The tutorials in that vein are the most important part of the course, in my opinion. It gives you a chance in small groups to explore ideas, to get engaged deeply in reading, and also, as I said, for you to be facilitating the learning of your peers. We've talked about being deeply self-reflective throughout the course and sharing that with others. And also we're trying to get you to really actually simulate some real leadership opportunities. So you'll get the chance to try to sell your idea to the Vice-Chancellor. And as I said, that session last year was very valuable in terms of several of those ideas actually being adopted now by the university. So in about 2 minutes, I want to say something about my leadership journey and some of the remarkable people that I've met as part of that. And I've been really fortunate to have worked a lot with Indigenous Australians and seen some very different models of leadership. So this old man, Tim Rakawuma, was a tribal elder of the Borroloola region in the Northern Territory of Australia. And I met him in the early 1980s for the first time. And he had an enormous leadership strength based on knowledge of country. on intellect and on capacity to deal with lots of different people. And it was a very different form of leadership from Western models of leadership. So often European authorities would come to that town and have no idea that he was actually the boss. He wasn't standing up on a pedestal saying, I'm the boss, but he was the most important person in that area. And at the same time, there was a very gendered form of leadership in that area too, with a remarkable range of women playing very strong leadership roles, being responsible for country. There was a book published in the late 80s called We Are Bosses Ourselves, which was an expression these two women, Annie Carricline and Eileen Guinea, came up with, saying that Aboriginal women have as much authority as Aboriginal men, but it's over different things and in different contexts. So leadership in those situations was quite situational. Again, that's something we'll explore. So just very briefly, two other leaders that have really been influential on my life is Professor Faya Gale, the woman here who was my PhD supervisor, who went on to become the second female Vice-Chancellor in Australia. And I might get a chance to say more in the education sessions about her. The thing that struck me was that she was treated quite differently to a male leader in a university. And I'm very conscious of the importance of exploring gender issues as a result partly of that experience, partly as a result of having four sisters who all regard themselves as feminists, and two daughters and I've seen grown up, who they're 21 and 23 now, and just seeing in many ways things are still different in some cases for women, and seeing that someone like Faye, who was obviously a very gifted academic, had to work harder than male professors to be respected, and I'll say more about that later. And just a final, very brief reflection on a leader, a scientific leader who happened to be my father-in-law. So Ralph Slatcher was the first chief scientist of Australia. When I was putting this course together, I had the chance to sit down with him and ask him who were the most impressive leaders he ever worked with. And he worked with 7 vice-chancellors and 7 prime ministers. And he singled 2 out, Crawford, the vice-chancellor, and Hawke, the prime minister, saying they both had something in common. And some of your assessment criteria reflect this. He said they both had the capacity to sum up situations incredibly succinctly in small number of words very quickly, and also to build up the capacity of everybody around them. And that was, the more I think about that, the more important it is. So he said both those two people had extraordinary ability to give him, as a leading scientist, very clear feedback on how well he was doing the job. And he said he always knew what he had to do to improve what he was doing all the time. So good leaders build up teams around them. And the final leader I just want to say, spend 1 minute on, was a 16-year-old girl 3 years ago, I think it was, in Melbourne, when her school social was on, and she wanted to take a girlfriend rather than a boyfriend. And a very brave statement if you think back about high school, what it's like to be 15, 16, 17, the peer pressures. So leadership often is something that you're not going to have much of a warning about when you're going to have to demonstrate it. And in that case, she said, no, I want to take my girlfriend to the social, and she actually had to leave the school because the school said that's not possible. But quite a stand for a 15, 16-year-old girl to make. So we're all going to have different opportunities to be leaders in different contexts. So I'll finish there and hand over to Anna.
Everybody stand up. Before I hand you over to Liz, we're going to